Now, live from CNA, the Comcast Network, this is Night Beat with Barry Nolan.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. The world's unquenchable thirst for oil and gas is forcing oil companies to drill in some of the harshest environments on the globe. And it takes a modern engineering marvel to create the massive machines needed to withstand the fury of nature and keep on drilling. Now, National Geographic's popular series Megastructures plans to take you inside the construction and operation of the world's largest oil rigs. Joining me now in studio is Ron Blau, producer of the Ultimate Oil Rigs episode. Thanks for being here, Ron.
Pleasure.
So I'm a guy that has a hard time figuring out how to put up a shelf in the garage. When you look at the construction of one of these things, and when you stand there and see it in real life, what do you say to yourself?
Well, the first time you see one, it is definitely awe-inspiring. It's huge. And it's complex. And the first time I was on one, it was really hard to figure out where I was. It's just very disorienting, partly because of the size and partly because of the complexity.
How big is the thing? Give me a sense of, what do you compare it to?
Some of the biggest ones are about the length of a football field on a side.
On each side?
On each side. In other words, imagine a triangle like 300 feet on a side, and on that triangle there's just drilling equipment and a place to live for over 100 people and all the ancillary equipment you could have.
And this is a thing that you build in a shipyardy kind of place?
Basically they are ships. I mean, they are technically barges, and I think they're certified as such. They build a barge in a shipyard. But they're a very special kind of barge. They don't have their own power to go around the world, but they do go around the world tug by tugboats. And then when they're on location in a place where geologists think that there is oil to be found or natural gas, there is a leg at each corner of the triangle that go up like hundreds of feet in the air. And these legs are driven down into the sea floor by huge motors, banks of huge motors, and they get the thing stable.
How deep is the water where they're set up?
Typically maybe 200, 300 feet. There are other kinds of rigs that can go out, much farther. But the typical one is called a jack-up rig. And it's called a jack-up rig because once it's got its footing, it is jacked up. Literally, they take this barge, millions and millions of pounds, and put it high enough so that even if there's a storm, the waves in the storm can't reach it. So typically it might be 100 feet above the sea.
And you got the easy assignment in this episode of Megastructures because you got to go to Singapore and see where they were making how many of these things?
They were, if you count the design and the engineering and the building, they were doing 23 of these monsters at once.
What does it cost to build one of these things? They give you a rough estimate of what it costs to build one of these?
Yeah, they can be $100 million or $200 million. And the operating costs are huge. They'll typically be over $100,000 a day. Because remember, you're feeding and paying for a crew of perhaps 100 people on each one.
One of your colleagues went to the North Sea? Where'd he go?
Yes, Craig Ginsberg, who was the co-producer, went to the North Sea and spent time on a rig called the Noble Pete.
So what hotel did you stay at when you were in Singapore?
When I was in Singapore, the Miramar.
The Miramar. Nice hotel.
Nice hotel.
That's your life. You're a TV producer. Could you imagine going out and living on one of these things? How long do these guys stay out on these rigs at a time?
They stay out typically 2 weeks at a time. And they're working every day. They're working 14 days straight. And they're working 12 hours a day. So it's pretty exhausting. In other words, if you have, let's say, 12 hours off, you might be sleeping for 8 of those hours, so you've just got 4 hours to eat and shower and lift weights or whatever you want to do.
But you don't have a lot of errands that you need to run.
You don't have a lot of errands, but the pay is high.
What do they make?
They can make, I think if you start at the bottom, maybe $35,000, but they can go up to like $100,000 or so. And this is essentially for half year's of work, because if you're on for two weeks, you're also off for 2 weeks, and then you're on for 2 weeks again, and you get transported by helicopter.
When you have one of the jobs at the bottom on one of these oil rigs, what kind of job do you have? What are you doing?
Well, these are the roughnecks.
Yeah.
They are literally helping with the drilling. I mean, some rigs are very automated, and they don't actually have these roughnecks out on the drill floor. I mean, machines grab the pipes and they put them in place. But on other ones, they're there and they're greasy and the pipes are swinging around and they're coming, and you might have 90-foot length of pipe swinging, and you've got to essentially guide it and take care of screwing the lengths of pipe together, because they're drilling for thousands of feet. So you drill for 90 feet, then you've got to attach another length of pipe, and then you go another 90 feet. And it's really complicated.
Say they doubled the price, they doubled the salary, $200,000 a year.
What would it?
Could you imagine doing it?
I can imagine doing it for maybe 2 weeks. If I could. No. But they're special breed of people. I mean, I've had people, because I went out on an oil rig last summer in the Gulf of Mexico, and some people really miss their home life, and some people say, my wife is so happy when I'm out here, so.
When they start, did you go with them when they begin to tug them out to where they're going to set them up? How far do they have to go sometimes? If you started in Singapore,
last year I was about 100 miles out into the Gulf of Mexico. The Noble Pete, the rig featured in this production, was out about 40 miles.
And we're looking at this, the sea right now on a rig that must be, I would guess the sea a moment ago must have been in the North Sea, because it looks...
That's the North Sea.
When you're out there like that, how grim does the weather get for these guys?
Well, the weather during filming was not very grim. And that was in the summer.
Because you guys are smart.
In the winter, we're lucky, because here it began to be hurricane season. But out there it was pretty good. But the waves there have been waves, 90 feet high. I mean, they're really bad. And typically in the Gulf of Mexico, when things get bad, people are ferried back to shore. Typically in the North Sea, they're not. So the rigs have to withstand these storms. They don't evacuate. What
do they say it's like to be on a rig in the North Sea with 90-foot waves? You don't go to work that day, right?
Typically you go, I mean, maybe under the worst conditions you don't go to work, but you go to work most of the time. I mean, it's tough. I mean, you're, under the drilling derrick and you're hard at work. I mean, they can't afford to stop paying those prices. I mean, they've got to weigh the people's safety against losing over $100,000 a day.
So it costs $100 million to make. It costs $100,000 a day to run. How long do these things have to be able to pump oil before they begin to make money? I'm trying to be a little bit more sympathetic to the people that charge me $3 a gallon for gasoline.
You do get a bit more sympathetic. But typically, you might drill for like 30 days, whatever 30 times $100,000 is that $3 million or something like that. And then what is done, these rigs don't stay in place all the time. Basically, they'll cap off the well because they're too expensive to run. They will go to a new assignment, and typically there's a permanent drilling platform at the site that takes over.
So they have to build a whole other platform to get the oil out after the hole's been drilled by these big behemoth things.
Right, which is not as elaborate. I mean, there are a few people on it. There's equipment, but I mean, it doesn't have to be able to navigate the sea.
So this is the thing that just drills the hole. It doesn't have to pump it, and then it goes and pumps another place and pumps another place.
Right. And the contracts, I mean, you can go online and see some of them. I mean, the contracts are for months. They may spend
the guys, the roughnecks that work on the thing.
Well, or the contracts between the oil companies and the drilling companies. In other words, the oil companies don't own these; they lease them for the time.
So that must be a kind of high-risk business to build one of these $100 million things that you're going to sit out in the North Sea in 90-foot waves and in a place where they have hurricanes. That I guess you deserve a little return.
And everything is risky. The shipbuilding part of it is risky as well, because they try to build, when the times are good, they try to build as many of these things as they can. And when times are bad, they try to slow down. But since it takes about 2 years for the design and the construction, from start to finish on one of these things, they have to think long term, and yet the economy is going up and down short term.
When you're out there seeing what it's like to live in it, what are the living quarters like? Is it, do you have a comfortable bed, cable TV, coffee pot? What's it like?
Your comfortable bed, your internet connection, your cable TV, your gym, good food, a lot of food, but you can't go more than 300 feet in any one direction or you'll fall into the sea.
What do these guys typically do when they have their 2 weeks off? Do they get another job, or do they go to the beach?
No, I think they typically go home and whatever their home life is like. I mean, if they're not married, then they go to the beach, but they might be married and have 3 kids, and their dad, Or
I once went way up north to the Arctic Circle, where there were guys that were going up to where I was in Resolute, and they were catching a small plane further north to go work in a zinc mine, where you work like 3 weeks on and then 3 weeks off. And I thought, oh man, it must be some days so hard to get back on that plane to go back to the zinc mine at the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Is it hard for these guys sometimes to leave Junior and the missus and go back out to put big greasy pipes in the water?
Yeah, and then some of them can't wait to get away from their wives and kids. I mean, it's all sorts of stories. I mean, it just depends on the individual person.
Are they looking at interesting new things to be able to do in the future that will be able to reach deeper places in the ocean?
Well, as the one of the people in the shipyard told me, it's basically incremental. They're no breakthroughs. It's not going to be like rocket-powered, unmanned vehicles. Going to be
hover pumps.
Yeah, hover pumps. That's not going to happen anytime soon. The drills the drilling gets more efficient. It might be the newer rig might be 8% more efficient. Do faster and go deeper than the other one. But it's not going to be anything radically different than what was done 20 years ago.
Cool. I want to watch tomorrow night. The Ultimate Oil Rigs episode of the weekly program Megastructures will air tomorrow night at 8 and 11 on the National Geographic Channel. Thank you, Ron Blau, so much for being here.
Thank you.